Good morning, everyone, and I hope you're all having a really good week. Welcome to this week's Jump Recruitment discussion, where we'll be discussing target or not to target. In the last couple of months, I've been working or been asked this question by a number of clients that I've been working with. And I have to say the answer is sort of not easy because I'm never too sure what the answer is. So today we're going to sort of delve into those answers and look at some stats and see how that works. So to sort of give us an idea of why we should be thinking about targeting or not targeting, 40% of companies failed to meet their sales goal in 2020. And that sort of came from HubSpot. At least half of your sales prospects are not a good fit for what you're selling. And that came from Sales Insights. What it says is 71% of the survey responded, said that 50% or less of the sales prospects end up being a good fit and 50% end up being a poor fit. So the question is, are we speaking to the right people? So again, when you're talking about targeting KPIs, there's this thing that we should think about who we are targeting. 27% of sales representatives report that making calls to new contacts is the most effective method. Only 46% of sales representatives reported having significant data on why buyers buy or their intent to buy. Sales professionals, I think, have a massive amount on their plate. And when you look at how we split their time, only 53% report spending most of their day working on selling, meaning 40% do not cite selling as their main activity. So what are we actually targeting people on? If we're thinking that only 47% think that their full day is on selling, then why are we giving them this big full target for that? 70% of salespeople say their CRM is very important for closing deals, which was quite an interesting stat. So if it's important for closing deals, why aren't we using it more? And 67% of companies believe that hitting sales quotas, is the best indicator of an individual sales performance. However, when we look at sales performance, it takes on average 18 calls to connect with a new buyer. 60% of customers say no at least 4 times before saying yes. 48% of salespeople never make a follow-up attempt. 80% of sales requires at least 5 follow-up calls, and 40% of salespeople do not or give up after 1 follow-up attempt. So basically after the second call. What they're also saying is that 4 in 10 salespeople are satisfied with their job, but they didn't reach their target, but were worried about being removed from their job. Only 24%, or 24.3% to be precise, of salespeople exceeded their yearly quota, and 79% of buyers think that sales reps should be an expert. So it's really important we start to think about what's going on. So when it comes to targeting, have we got it right? Or are we doing it wrong? Do we need to change? Can we target your salespeople and exceed our sales goals and create a sales culture without a target? So the question that's going to be asked today is Heather's with us and Dave's with us. Paul's down in sunny Bristol, I believe, today. So let's kick into these questions. So the first question is simple. Why do we actually target salespeople?
Shall I kick us off?
Yeah, jump in there, Dave.
So I'm going to go back to the world of music and the original Elvis, as in Elvis Costello, not Elvis Presley. Elvis Costello has a brilliant song called My Aim Is True. And that for me sums up why we would target our salespeople, because we want their aim to be true, but more importantly, we want them to have something to aim for. Whatever those targets are, whatever way they look like, however they're constructed, and they could be right or wrong, the point is I think it's important for people to know where they're going and how they're going to get there. So that's a kind of simple answer for me as to why we target why we target consultants or anybody in that matter. It's not just consultants, because most people in the roles that they work in our recruitment world have some sort of targets. It could be cash collection for finance. It could be number of appraisals done for certain members of the team. It's not all about sales, but I think it's important that their aim is true and they know what they're going for.
I love the fact that you mentioned Elvis Costello as the tweet.
Oh, he's a hero. I'd love him. Let's get him as a guest.
Yes, I saw him at the Hammersmith Palais, which doesn't even exist as a venue anymore.
There you
Very,
go.
very long
There you
time ago.
go.
But the song that popped into my head when you said his name was "I Can't Stand Up from Falling Down." So there's a different one. I was thinking, how are we going to work that into?
Yeah, that's right.
But actually, I think it is I think it's quite relevant. We can't hit all of our targets. We can't. It's not, and if we are hitting all of our targets, we're not got the right target. So sorry, that's tenuous. But why do we target? I think you're right, Dave. I think that it's exactly about that. We have to know what it is that's expected of us, and so whatever field it is in, whether it's somebody externally setting us targets or it's us setting our own, there are measure by which we judge our direction and our performance. So I think it's a very wide, huge question, Howard.
It is a wide, huge question. I think why we target consultants is that we want to give, as David said there, we want to give them a path to follow. We want to give them a direction that they're going in, so they know that they're going in the direction. But I suppose the bigger question is that, if we remove those targets away from them, then, and still gave them direction in where they're going, but not actually targeting a figure to pass or a milestone to achieve, would we still get a same or similar or better result? And, the question is that leads into, and I think this is the bigger question though, if that's the case, we need to give them a direction that we go into, okay, why do we need to target a consultant if we pay them commission? Because generally what I tend to see is that the commission is not directed to their sales target. But if we're trying to drive someone to hit commission, and let's say simple mathematics, we want someone to make 2 deals a month, and those 2 deals on average are 5k a month, that's 10k. But then we put a kicker in at 12k to try and drive them over 12k. Why do we need to target if our commission structure is completely different? Is our commission structure therefore not a de facto target?
I think our commission structure is a de facto target. I think in pretty much every organisation I've come in contact with, it is. Whether or not it's the right one, Howard, is a different question. So, we get the behaviours we measure, and we get the behaviours we reward. And so I'm not always sure that we are sophisticated enough in understanding what behaviours we're going to get based on what we target. So I think it's a massive question, isn't it? It's absolutely commission and targets are intrinsically linked, but are we really thinking through the link between the behaviours we want and the results that we want?
And that's where that culture performance comes in. That would you then say you could forego having a sales target for the person if their commission then is all about hitting milestones to exceed or increase their earnings and drive their earnings up? Because you've got 2 different motivators, haven't you? You've got one, I've got to hit my sales target, and then one, I've got to hit my commission target. But what we don't actually think about is our commission target if our sales target is absolutely far greater than our commission target. So we don't tend to see commission as a target. It's really interesting when you speak to people and so you talk about what you target on, they target on sales, etc. When you talk about, well, you target on them earning money. No, we tell them how to earn money, but we don't target on them. That's the commission structure. But the commission structure to me is a target. And if that commission structure is right, then surely that commission structure should usurp a sales target.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
They're intrinsically linked. They have to be. You can't have one working against the other. And I guess it also depends on in what context as well, because it isn't always ultimately about business performance if you're in a different job. So, as I say, it depends on what are the behaviours you want to get, what are the outcomes that you want when you decide what your targets are, and they absolutely should be intrinsically linked to how the commission structure is designed. You can't have one working against the other.
So let's I'm going to push a question into the pair. You also had you've been a HR director of a recruitment agency that had multiple agencies within that one big agency.
Yeah.
Dave, you've obviously been, Spring, etc., and again have multiple agencies. How often did you link your commission structure to your consultant sales targets?
Always, actually, in the
Well, for me, most of the time, I remember when the business that I was part of, was bought by the company that became Spring, and I was the operations director. And on the same floor, we had the consultants of Intertek, the consultants of Inline KPG, and the consultants of Software Personnel. All of those companies eventually became Spring, but I had the lovely task of managing them all. And they had 3 different approaches to customers, 3 different approaches to targets, and about 33 different approaches to commission. And it took a long while to sort it out, but it came down to the individual at the desk. Did that individual know what they had to achieve? And did they know what they were going to be paid for what they have to achieve? And it still amazes me today that when people are about to close a deal, or they're about to make a placement, or place a contract, or whatever it is from a sales process, look at the front end rather than the back end of the operation. If you look at that front customer facing end, so many of them don't know that if they do this deal, this is what they'll earn. They have to wait for a month to find out. Or they have to wait for timesheets to come in, or whatever it is. And I think that's where the commission becomes divorced from the target. So I worked for a guy called Dennis Linscott, and I mention him because he passed away very shortly after selling Intertek, and he was a lovely, lovely guy. But he had a number of truisms that have stayed with me for all my life. And one of them, and I've used this many times and have bored many people to death with it, including salespeople, was that a target is the floor that you stand on, not the ceiling that you aspire to. In other words, we as owners of a company are building our business based on the targets we believe that you can hit. If you hit those targets, you'll get paid X. If you do more, you'll get more.
Yeah.
But you need to know that our business is based on, if there's 10 sales staff, it's based on you 10 hitting this target. And we're going to go away and have the right office and the right CRM and the right facilities and marketing and support. But you've got to do that. And if you do that, you'll get this. And if you do more, you'll get more. But if 5 of you are 80%, we've got a problem. So just see the target as that's what you're here to do. Yeah, we believe,
and I never understood that with
fair.
targets and commission structures. And I accept that I'm looking at it from an HR point of view, but I could never understand commission structures and bonus payments that pay out at less than hitting your target. So, I will pay this bit out if you hit 80% of it or 85%. And I said, why? Like, why have the target then? The target wrong.
So what we're saying then is, I'm going to play devil's advocate in all of this situation and jump from one seat to another just to create sort of conversation. What we're saying then is a lot of commission structures are divorced from the actual sales target. And as Stu Quinn has put on here, the target's the minimum expectation. But, does that mean that every single person in the business should have the same sales target, where I know lots of different companies have different sales target for different people, et cetera, et cetera. So I think if you're going to then uniform your sales target and then attach it to your commission structure, yes, then it drives and motivates both sides. But what you're saying, Heather, is absolutely right. If you're then paying below minimum expectation, then is that driving the behaviors that you require? And so the question then that really starts with the big question is, if all of that what we're saying is true, and then we believe the stats, if less than 25% of people hit targets, why are we not looking to drive or motivate these people in a different way if only 25% hit target? So either we've got our targets radically wrong, which means then we've got our commission radically wrong, or we're motivating people in the wrong way.
But it may not come. I wouldn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't know that for the companies that I'm engaged with, or that we Jump are engaged with, that only 25% of their staff hit target, because I think they would be having a much more severe sales crisis of confidence if only 1 in 4 of their people were on target. That isn't the evidence that I've got of the last few years. If you end up with a sales floor of, say, 20 people, you've normally got 4 superstars, then a whole group of people are average but contributing, and average can be still good, and then you've got a few that aren't performing. And really, you need to spend the effort as well on the few that aren't performing and seeing if you can get them back to where they need to be. Make sure that the commission that they're being paid is linked to the behaviours you want. And then hopefully those people will be on target. I certainly wouldn't get rid of the targets just because somebody isn't performing as well. If you are running a company where only 1 in 4 of your salespeople is hitting target, then there may be a question about actually the target's not the right one. Yeah, or you've got too many people in the business for the company target that you need to hit. But ideally, you want people to have a target. You want to budget at 80% of that target, and you want as many as you can to hit it or exceed it.
Yeah, I'd love to know more, Howard, because I always love your stats about where that 25% of salespeople hitting target. I'm guessing that that's not just recruitment, because
that's across
I think all of our experience of recruitment businesses is that we absolutely don't have 25% hitting it, unless you're talking about a cohort of trainees that you're bringing in, who are still training, developing, growing, becoming competent. They're not yet at competence. That doesn't feel like a comfortable statistic for me in terms of recruitment. Is
that Leeds United strikers that you've got that?
That's less than 24%, Dave. That stat came from a whole host of different websites, and they're all repeating 24 to 25% from there. And I think the stat came originally from out of HubSpot, which was part of a Gallup poll that they did to look at what's going on. So this is across salespeople, not just across recruitment. It's across all salespeople. But if I went back to, say, my days at CP, what they tended to do was then individualize everyone's target. So if you did 400K in a year, then next year you're expecting to have a 20% uplift, so your 20% would come on top of that. So everyone had different sales targets, and I could probably generally say in that between 25 and 30% were hitting target. The rest, as Dave was saying there, were either on that line or going below that line. And then there was quite a large chunk of people below that line. So I can see that stat and how it works in a big organization. But what you're saying is that if I looked at my Leeds division, I had 2 or 3 people who were hitting £1 million plus. Then I had a load of people who were hitting probably 200 to 240K, but they were all targeted at 300. And so they were all below target. The commission structure had nothing to do with the target. It was just based on how much you bill. So it didn't drive it. So the actual intrinsic driver was the commission structure. So I focused on how you could bill, motivate people by what they earn by going back and how to break the commission structure. It wasn't about hitting target. But then they'd look at target and say, if you're not hitting target, we're going to discipline you. And that was the bit where I fought against that, disciplining people. They're still having a really good performance. But it's that demotivational bit where you see, I've got a target, but I'm not hitting it, but I'm still performing really, really well. And that's the sort of mind dilemma that you've got with people, that if you're earning good money, but you're still behind target, that would really still play on my mind that I'm behind target. So I think that question there is really, how we motivate people is, are we motivating them by money, which is short term, or are we motivating by something else which drives performance and increases performance? What is it that we're actually motivating people on? So the question then sort of flips. If we didn't target consultants, how would you motivate them to achieve?
I love this question, but I don't think it's an either or. So I think you do target. I think you do, but it isn't the only reason people do their jobs. I think it's, targeting is about creating, we said at the beginning, it's about, what behaviors we want and creating the right pathways and giving people direction and showing them what it is that you want them to focus on. but the reason people do well in their job is so much more complicated than how we target them. And I think we did a good webinar on this, just you and me, Howard, a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? We talked about culture and different reasons that people do jobs and stuff like that. And I think that motivation, that intrinsic desire to do a good job, that desire to service our customers, that desire to work with our candidates and have that absolutely amazing moment of knowing you help somebody find their dream job, and all of those more altruistic things that are why we go out of our way to provide great service to our clients and great service to our candidates. That of course they're linked to money, and of course that's one of the drivers and targets and stuff, but there's way more to it. There's all of that piece about feeling invested in the business I work for, because I care about the people around me and I care about the values and goals of the organization. And that's something I think all our clients and also sort of smaller recruitment business are fantastic at, creating that culture and belonging and all of the other things that we do alongside commission and targets. That it's such a narrow part of why people do a good job for us in our recruitment businesses.
Yeah, and I think also how do you introduce that word to reduce the pressure on people. Well, your targets aren't working if your people are feeling lots of pressure, because for me that's about leadership. If you can lead people well, if you can coax and coach better behavior for them to hit their target, there shouldn't be that pressure on them. A little bit of pressure, a little bit of come on, we want to help you get there, that's okay. But the implication of loads of pressure because you're only 80% of target or 75% of target, whatever it is, rarely have I seen somebody that is below their target, say 75%, have a load of pressure apply on them. Come on, you got to do better, and whip them into shape and all of those type of phrases. Rarely have I ever seen that lead to transformational behavior. It normally leads to them feeling even more pressure, feeling even more devalued, and then eventually they leave. And then guess what? The manager goes, well, they were no good anyway.
How many times have we heard that?
And it's like, well, hold on. They were good because you hired them. You hired them for a reason. You hired them to do a good job. The gap is, how do you get them from 75 to 100%? And that's about culture, leadership, ability. Go back to that very first question. Do they know where they're going? Do they know how they're going to get there? Do they know what the steps are? If you've got £100,000 target and after the first quarter you're £5,000, you've suddenly got £95,000 to do in the last 3 quarters. Well, that may seem like so far away. If you've then got a load of pressure on you to try and climb that, most people, whether they're salespeople, support people, whatever role they're doing, most people, that's too big a task. So they need help.
And it does link, I think, Dave, doesn't it, to the kind of people we hire? And I think we covered this again as well. If we hire people who are motivated by money, then we have to get that side right. But that isn't what we're filling our recruitment businesses with anymore. And it's not what the job is anymore. And so we are filling our recruitment businesses with different people doing different parts of the job, and we're chunking things differently and we're structuring it differently, and we're using automation, and and so we have to think about what we're targeting people on in that context.
That's the very point that I was trying to get to. And if you sort of read the quote that I've got up here from H. Jackson Brown Jr., all these guys that were brilliant at what they did, had the same hours in every day, but they weren't driven by targets. They weren't targeted to, you've got to paint the Sistine Chapel in X amount of days. They just were driven by their own performance and what they should be doing. So I agree with what Annette's saying to a certain degree, that targets should be challenging, but should we be thinking, what does good look like? So if I looked at the average consultant, is good 10K a month? If that means, then do we target everybody on 120K a year? And then we accelerate a commission structure that goes above that to drive those people that really want to go for that. I was never driven by my own financial target or by what I was getting paid, because I thought that was a benefit, the benefit of being really good. What I was driven by was looking at a league table and looking where I was on the league table. Was I on the top of that league table or not? And if I wasn't on top of it, then that would drive me to get there. So the question is, if we ignore the money target and focus people on productivity, would it reduce the pressure that people feel to hit the financial target, or should we target and link target to be well-being and things like that? Because happy people we know produce more money.
Howard, this is going to be slightly weird, and I apologise for this, but I was clearing out some emails this morning, and I found an email from 2019 that somebody sent me, and I think it's relevant to that point you're trying to make, especially about well-being. And it's a quote from a philosopher, a classical philosopher called Marcus Aurelius, and he said, "If you seek tranquility, do less." And he says that in a note to him for clarification, don't do nothing, just do less. Only do what's essential. So do less, better. And it's that's something that Engage, the company I used to work for, adopted as part of our philosophy in the organisation. And I think that links really nicely into productivity and well-being. And it's about, are we focusing people on targeting the things that actually make a difference? Yeah. And is that where the pressure should come from? Is the pressure to do the things that we know work? And so I think it's a great quote, because there's no point in doing the inessential stuff and targeting us on the inessential stuff. We should be targeting and putting pressure on the things that we know
matter.
work.
So should we be thinking, if we're changing our target from what we're saying there, we target people on monetary and we hunger and court them on monetary targets, etc., when really it's the productivity targets that we should be really looking at. We just look at that as a key performance indicator, but that productivity creates the monetary target. So are we focusing at the wrong end of the actual targeting chain?
Well, for me, we should be targeting our people on what matters to the business. So I'll give you a real live example from last week with a client. They work in a very specific technology sector, and they're trying to hire people who make 100 calls a day. Yeah, who these people are and where they are is news to me, unless they're in a call center, because most technology candidates never knowingly answer their phone because they're busy doing the coding and developing. So they don't answer the phone to hundreds and hundreds of agents. You have to connect with them via the social sectors that they want to connect with, or LinkedIn, or you join Stack Overflow, or whatever it is. So there's a huge disconnect already between a company trying to hire people to make loads and loads of calls to candidates who actually are saying to them, please don't call us, please email us, please connect with us on Stack Overflow, or whatever it is. So from that point of view, it doesn't matter how many targets that particular company has, its understanding of the way that the customer, in this case the candidate, is buying is completely different. So having 100 calls a day is meaningless. Yeah, having 0 calls a day but 30 emails a day to that particular candidate community, that's a much better target. So you've got to know what, you've got to know the way the customers are buying and the candidates, the way they want to hear from you before you set that type of target.
So what we're saying is then we should be focusing more on our productivity and how we target productivity. And obviously each person's going to have a different view of their productivity. Some people might be really good at emails and get a lot of response to emails. Some people might be really good at picking the phone up and calling people, etc. So should we be focusing more on productivity so that people can see what productivity or what type of productivity links to the target they should be trying to attain, and therefore the monetary target is neglected, because obviously if you hit the right productivity, you should hit the right monetary target.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really interesting about that and challenging about it is the productivity targets are going to be different depending on the desk, the role, the market, the type of candidate, the type of client. There isn't a one measure works, and we certainly knew that in our group of companies, because every single there were no consistent productivity based targets that we could put in across everybody. We very much had to be managers working with individuals to work out what were the things that impacted on that particular type of desk with that particular cohort of candidates, because as Dave says, you can get this horribly wrong, and it also changes over time. So you've got to be up to date with it.
Yeah.
So it goes back to your quote there, focus on the little bits that actually are meaningful, and do less of the stuff that's not, and drive that bit that's meaningful. And again, when I go into some companies and I see 20, 30 KPIs all stretched out, this is what I measure my team on, and I'm thinking, wow, that's, how demotivating would that be? You're behind on 25% of them, but you're still smashing target. And, I had that feeling with my first boss. I remember constantly leaving work at 5:30, being 120, 130, 140% of target, and that you go, you're behind on your call numbers, you're behind on this, you're behind on that. And I just point to the board and say, but I'm massively up on that. What do you want me to do about it?
You had a quote, Howard, from Jackson Browne on there. Well, the original, I'm going to go all musical again. The original Jackson Browne wrote a brilliant song for the Eagles called Take It Easy. And I think that's our approach to targeting. Take it easy. Only measure what matters. What is the point of setting a whole load of targets when actually they're either not measured or not looked at? I remember working with a company a few years ago, and they showed me their board pack and all of the stats that their CRM had produced. And I just challenged her. I said, surely nobody is sitting there and analysing all of these. And as I said that, they said, oh, here we are. And here was another pack with another 6 or 7 pages with graphs and pie charts and goodness knows what. And I set them a challenge of measuring 3 key things. And we didn't ever get to 3. It went down a lot. We never got to 3. But the point was that you only need to measure what really matters.
Yeah.
And what really matters for your business will be different for the next person's business or the next person's business.
So the question then leads to managers spend an awful lot of time then meeting and helping salespeople who are underachieving against their financial target. So how could they spend their time more productively that would help grow a team? And I've said this for many a year, I'd rather have a team of 10 or 15 people who are billing 120K than a team of 5 people who are all billing 500K.
Yeah.
I'd like both. Thanks.
Well, you'd like both. You like a mix of both, but the pressure of keeping these people billing really high is really hard work. But you want good, steady people who are good for your business. But if you lose that person, then it doesn't make a massive impact on your business, where your big billers make a huge impact. But most of our managers spend most of their time helping people who are underachieving the target that's being set. So how could we make their time more productive?
I'm a great believer in the manager as a coach, and I know you both are as well. I think, giving our managers the skills to be effective coaches makes a huge impact on productivity. And I think it's sometimes really unreasonable not to give managers those skills, because that is the way they make the biggest difference to the people in their teams, is to be able to effectively coach them, to be able to spend time with them and work out what is the bit of the jigsaw puzzle that's missing, and how are they going to plug that gap, and what are those skills that, and we see that with Good to Great programs where you've got those 10 120 billers, but what if you could move those 10 120 billers up to 200,000 pound billers by some good coaching and turn them from good to great? There's so much impact that a manager as a coach can make.
But if you look at that even slightly, Heather, you're not going to get everyone from 120 to 200, but you could get everyone from 120 to 135. Yeah. And that's a huge amount of difference, across the whole business, because you're just pushing your average up slightly and driving your average up. So to me, your manager is the most influential person, but we spend most time with them trying to mend people that potentially might not be broken, but we think we're broken because we've over-targeted and demotivated them, and therefore we're giving them a different pressure that isn't conducive to actually increasing their sales.
I think where managers as well behave the best, or in the highest performing companies that I've seen, is where the managers show their staff how to do things rather than tell them. Yeah, for example, I've asked them to make 30 calls, they're just not doing it. Well, maybe you could make 5 of those calls. Then you could spend some time assessing how you made them, what's the learning from that, and then say to the consultant, now see if you can do that, and help them and coach them along the way. To Heather's point about coaching them, that's a really better use of a manager's time than just telling them. How many times we've all heard this? Back in my day, I used to do that. Well, you know what? Your day disappeared last year,
Yeah.
let alone 10 years ago. The world of work is changing at such a pace that actually our consultants need senior people and helpful people to guide them through what on earth is going on out there, not to tell them to overcome some of the objections and the way that the candidates and clients behave.
So I had a real interesting conversation with somebody this morning who's actually on the webinar today, Mark. And it was a really interesting conversation about the 24%. What do we do with the rest, the 76% basically? And we were saying, and we talked about recruiting the wrong people. We talked about, the training's potentially not right. And he came out with an absolute great comment on an email saying that if we want to be seen as professional, then we should be training people like professionals are trained. If you're trained to be a lawyer, you train over 4 or 5 years to be a lawyer. If you train to be a doctor, you train over 7 or 8 years to become a doctor, etc. We train people to become a recruiter over 2 days and expect them to succeed. And to me, that's where it starts to sort of boil down, is that if you want your people to be more productive, then we should engage our management in developing our people. And as I say, that APDEX coach is absolutely the right thing to do. And then gradually grow their targets based on their capabilities, as we do with, if you look at, say, legal firms, they get better and better and better opportunities. The further up we get, the more experienced they become and the more knowledgeable they become. And that's just the same as recruiters. And that's where I think that mirror and match problem that you're talking about there, Dave, as a training, I think is a problem, because if you're mirroring me and you're a brand new recruiter, I'm doing everything that you're not. You're trying to call candidates or trying to call clients. I'm arranging interviews, I'm calling the client, I'm calling a candidate, I'm speaking to somebody else, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I'm doing everything I can to do my job, but that's not what you're doing. And I think that mirror and match can work really well if I say, Dave, I'm going to sit down with you for the next 3 hours, and me and you for the next 3 hours are going to call candidates on this job, and we're going to learn from each other. And that, when we start to see mirror and match actually work, where I think we try to do mirror and match at the moment, and we throw the new person in at the deep end, tie a couple of bricks to them, sit on their head and say, right, now swim to the surface. And when they get to the surface, we just go, well done, and give them another brick, rather than actually helping them. And I think that comment by Mark was really important, that, we are trying to become professional recruiters, but we give them 2 days worth of training, where most professionals have 1,000 hours of training to become experts at what they're doing. So I think there's a point on there. So if we were going to set sales targets, if we were going to set sales targets, what is the main thing that you'd focus on then to ensure fairness across the business and success for people to achieve targets? Because if people feel more, if people feel like they're performing, then they will perform better. So how do we do that? How do we sort of change the setting of targets where we can focus on fairness across the business and achieving overall success for all? What would you focus on?
I mean, it's not an easy, simplistic answer, but I have found that when people have involvement in the ownership of their targets, they tend to perform better. So if we agree that there's a community of salespeople, let's just focus on salespeople, and they've all got to hit this target. You've joined us, you're on £20,000 salary, and your target's £100,000 a year, off you go. That's much less effective than you've joined us, this is your salary, this is where we want you to get to, this is how you're going to get to. You don't know a lot, but this is the way it works. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And you get their buy-in. And you can do that whether you're a new company of 5 months old or 50 years old. You get the buy-in from the person you're working with. So this goes back to Heather's point about managers as coaches, and you have that shared ownership of the target. So the target doesn't automatically come with a salary. It comes with, well, this is what we expect. This is what the business needs. This is the way the candidates and the clients react. And this is your target. What do you think? And you have that conversation and away you go.
Yeah, and I think that's linked to transparency and that openness and being yeah, the fairness comes from it not being something that happens in secret. So we're all happy to discuss things. Now it's that's different from our commission structures, and there is something about transparency and fairness and equality that you've got to have in there. But when we're talking about targeting, I completely agree with what you're saying, Dave. It's about how we agree the targets and how we share them and how we get buy-in to them, almost more than the absolute nature of the target.
So it's an interesting one, isn't it? If we focus on fairness, what's fair to everybody, then your commission structure becomes really important, because you have levels above that fairness for those overachievers, and therefore they're compensated for that overachievement. And that's where those targets and your commission structure need to link. I think, we've still got to get those people who are that, 80% to 105%. How do we take those people and make them all grow by 10%? That's a huge uplift for the business. But it's usually those people who are between 80 and 100% that transition in and out of your business constantly, because they don't feel that it's fair. They feel that they're under pressure. They feel that they're not hitting target, etc., etc. And that's the bit where we lose so many people, and that churn and burning recruitment comes, where actually that person could sit there and bill 100k every year, and you should be really happy, but they feel pressure for various different reasons. So, I think that fairness is a real interesting question. How do we make our targets fair so people feel like that they are achieving? And then how do we then drive our overachievers to overachieve?
Yeah, I think fairness is also very subjective, isn't it? If you've got ownership of the target, both the manager and the individual, then it will be perceived to be much more fair, because it's part of the, you own it together. It's not been given to you. I used to work for a boss who, when I would indicate that I didn't think something was fair, his response was, well, life's not fair. And the conversation then ended.
That's a classic parenting line, isn't it?
Well, yeah, exactly. And I was still quite new, so I didn't really have the skills to know how to deal with a person that was my quite senior boss. And I didn't quite know what to do with it, except I'd go home and think, well, life's not fair. And I used to think, what on earth am I doing working for this person? But that was it. That doesn't help anybody.
Classic.
So the question then that we should really sort of end this with is, if we didn't target a consultant, how would you motivate them?
So I think you should target a consultant to push back. So I think careful targeting gives people a map of what the behaviors that you're looking for. But if we're talking about the other ways in which people are motivated, well, it's about our culture and it's about our values and it's about our reward schemes. But actually, they're all a form of targeting, aren't they? Because they are showing people what are the behaviors that we reward in our organization and that we aspire to and that we want to create in our organization. So I think it's hard to say what would we not do if we weren't targeting.
Yeah. It's interesting that single comment there is really interesting, Heather, from you, from a HR perspective. We start to look at that. So what we're saying is that salespeople are trying to target on sales and calls, etc., but we're not really delving into the pure productivity to find out what's the real small things that actually make the biggest effect. And you're talking about more intrinsic things, about how to make people feel good so they feel better and will perform better as a different target. We don't see them as a target. We don't think about our company's well-being or our company culture if we create our country culture and grow that culture and it improves by 10%, will that have a massive infect the rest of the business and they all grow by 10%? Yeah.
And they are all so intrinsically linked, Howard. These things are absolutely intrinsically linked and can be lined up to make sure that your targeting and your development and your culture and your well-being strategy and all of those things are linked to ultimately what we want, which is stable, productive, growing organizations.
Dave?
Yeah, and I think to Heather's point and your point, we should target people. I don't think we should do that in any. That's just part of the way that people want that navigation. They want to know where they're going and how they're getting there. But as a standalone, they don't work. If your culture isn't right, your people aren't engaged, they don't trust you, they have no sense of purpose. If all of that's missing, you can target them in whatever way you want, then they're not going to perform. Whereas as part of that whole of that engagement and that trust and that purpose and that culture, then targeting works.
It's interesting. Two comments have just come in from Mark and Adam, and they're right in their thing, because I just use 120k as a standard target. Yeah, but if your average is 2 deals a month and your average is 3k a deal, then you're talking 72k. So it depends how you boil that down. But you're right in what you're saying is, what is the 80% of our target? Gear the target down, retain and retrain your staff. And I think the thing that we talk about is that retention of staff. The more you retain your staff, the more productivity there'll be for a longer period of time, and the more money they'll actually make the business overall. But if you're churning and burning and that training all the time, then it doesn't work. And the other side is what Adam's talking about, is people motivated by a shared purpose. And that is about culture, values, and behaviors. But that means that your recruitment has to be around that shared purpose, not around the skills of recruitment. If you get the right people in the business, then they'll do the right things. I've got one client that says to people who come to, when he recruits them, choose your salary. And so they choose their own salary. But what they also know is, when choosing their salary, they're also then choosing their own target. And the target is linked to the commission structure, and therefore the higher the salary, the less commission they're potentially going to earn, depending on how much money they're going to bill. But they know that, but they then have a choice of how they feel and what they do. And he's very fair on how that works. And that's all about the culture and the values within the business and what he wants within the business. And he's finding that most people are above target, irrespective of the target that they the salary banding that they've chosen. But every year they have a meeting, and every year they have a choice to say whether they increase their salary, decrease their salary. It is very much down to the consultant what he picks as a salary, which is such a revolutionary way of doing it. But then that salary is linked to the target that he wants them to achieve. So it's, back yourself basically on that sort of
question. How does it work for them?
Yes, absolutely, it works for them.
Yeah.
So they've got a very low attrition rate, and they've got a very high success rate of people they're bringing through. But what he spends most of his time on is training and developing and helping them grow, rather than managing them, measuring them, etc. Because their measures are already set by themselves and what they're expecting to achieve. So it's just a different way of looking at it. But I'm pretty certain if you spoke to a lot of people on this call here and said, go to ask your consultants to pick a salary, they'd be frightened. But when you link it to say, but that's your target, then it's a very different sort of kettle of fish. So I think what we're saying in here, though, is, as we bring this to a close, is that we believe that targeting is right, but perhaps we're not targeting the right things. And whatever we target, it needs to be linked to the intrinsic drivers of the business, whether that be value, behaviors, money, to make sure that we're doing the right things. And the fact that most companies have so many different KPIs that maybe we're demotivating people or demotivating people because there's so much for them to think about, when really we should be thinking about what creates success and what makes people feel good, which is the behavioral side and the intrinsic side of the business. Yeah,
good.
Okay, so next week, we've got a different side to look at this, because next week we've tested already, commission structures. This week we've tested about, putting targets into place. Next week, we're going to talk about putting a 90-day sprint in and putting those 90-day sprints in together. Paul Jacobs wrote this, and it's very nice because Paul's not here next week. Paul's put down here 10 things that will make you successful in your 90-day sprint. So I think Paul's challenging us guys to come up with 10 things that will make you successful in your 90-day sprint. But I think it's important that we look at those 90-day sprints, because I think, again, when we start to go back on targets, what we tend to look at is every day's performance, where I know that Heather might be up one day and Dave might be down, and the next day it reverses. But if Dave's down today, I'm going to give him a hard time as a manager, where really it should be over a long period of time. And I think 90 days sprints that we work a lot with our clients, if we run them properly, they have a huge effect on the business. So next week, we're going to talk about how to run a 90-day sprint and how that can drive performance, but also increase cultural development. Thank you very much, Heather and Dave. Thank you much.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Howard.
Thanks for all your questions, guys. Very much appreciated.
Everybody.
It's always an interesting session, this, and I love playing devil's advocate on it all. Look forward to seeing you all next week.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the questions.